Hello, and thank you for joining the talk today. I will be presenting on the status of Lake Sturgeon in the Lake Michigan Basin. My name is Jessica Collier. I'm a fish biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the Green Bay Field Office. This map is of the Lake Michigan Basin, and it indicates the 41 historic spawning stocks of Lake Sturgeon in the Lake Michigan Basin. Of these 41, 13 are considered extant. These are represented by the green circle. 3 of these populations are considered extant through supplementation. These are indicated by the blue triangle. 9 of the 41 historic spawning stocks are considered extirpated, and these are the red squares on the map. 5 of those 5 stocks were formerly extirpated, but through stocking and streamside rearing efforts, they are now considered reintroduced, and these are indicated by the orange diamonds. 10 of the historic stocks, we don't currently know the status, and they are considered unknown. These are the black stars on the map. And 1 of the historic populations is indicated by the purple star, has undergone reintroduction efforts. This is on the Cedar River, but we don't yet know what the status of that population is, so it's considered unknown but reintroduced. So thinking about the historic notes on Lake Sturgeon and what we currently know, as I'd mentioned in the previous slide, there were 41 known adult Lake Sturgeon spawning populations across Lake Michigan. Of those, 16 are considered extant or extant through supplementation, but only 3 of those populations on Lake Winnebago system, the Menominee River, and the Peshtigo River have a population that is abundant enough to be considered healthy and secure. And recruitment is currently occurring in 8 tributaries within Lake Michigan, but historically it had occurred in 32 tributaries. It had been estimated that the historic spawning adult Lake Sturgeon population in Lake Michigan was somewhere between 177,000 and 385,000 fish. But today we estimate that that population is somewhere around 3,000, so just a small fragment of what that historic population was. And while historically some natural barriers may have existed, so for instance waterfalls or features that were created by the Niagara Escarpment, what we see today is that there are many more barriers to fish migration on tributaries throughout Lake Michigan, but there has been effort recently to reconnect and provide passage for fish to their historic spawning grounds. So this map of Lake Michigan is indicating the presumed historic population, the blue circles, and as I had mentioned in the previous slide, there are 8 known spawning populations or stocks that have recruitment into Lake Michigan, and those are indicated by the green circles. So I had mentioned that our current estimate of the abundance is somewhere around 3,000 spawning adults throughout the whole of Lake Michigan, and this is how we develop those numbers. So in the Menominee River, there's about 1,000 spawning adults, and in the Peshtigo, about 500. These 2 river systems, as you can see on the pie chart, make up more than half of the spawning adult population for the whole Lake Michigan Basin. The remaining 6 rivers, the Manistee, Muskegon, Grand, Kalamazoo, Fox, and Oconto River, are the rest of the recruitment and spawning stocks for Lake Michigan. What you might also notice is that the Lake Winnebago system has about 40,000 spawning adult Lake Sturgeon in it, estimated. And the reason why this number isn't part of our calculation for adults in Lake Michigan is that the Lake Winnebago system is disconnected from Lake Michigan. The Fox River has about 9 locks and dams that are separating these populations. And so while it is healthy and robust in Lake Winnebago, and that is part of the overall Lake Michigan Basin, these stocks are not connected to one another. And so we don't consider those sturgeon in Lake Winnebago to be part of the contributing population of those 3,000 estimated spawning adults in Lake Michigan. So when we are considering the status for Lake Sturgeon, there are multiple factors that we weigh and look into. The first is recruitment, and as I had mentioned, recruitment is occurring in 8 tributaries throughout Lake Michigan. The next is the number of secure populations. And as I'd mentioned, the Lake Winnebago, the Menominee River, and the Peshtigo River are the only stocks in Lake Michigan that are abundant enough to be considered healthy and secure. But stocking and supplementation has been undergoing efforts throughout the basin for about 15 years, and we are seeing that these numbers are working. And we know this because mature sturgeon have begun coming back to some of the rivers that they were initially stocked into. We're also seeing an increase in the catch of juvenile lake sturgeon in some of our population assessment nets. They also have access to habitat that has been increasing through dam removals and through active fish passage efforts. And we're seeing that the catch rates of both wild lake sturgeon and stocked juvenile lake sturgeon has been increasing in the population assessments throughout the lake over the past 10 years. So as we're considering these, we have an estimated population size in Lake Michigan around 3,000 spawning adults, recruitment in only a quarter of the historic tributaries. There's very few lake sturgeon populations that are abundant and secure, but with stocking and supplementation efforts that have been occurring and seeing fish returning, we consider the status of lake sturgeon in Lake Michigan to be poor, but it has been improving over the past 10 years. And though we think that the long-term trend is undetermined right now, that is only because there hasn't been enough time to consider what those populations will look like because of their long lifespan, slow age to maturity, and it takes them about 20 years till they get to reproductive age. We don't yet have a good estimate, and so the long-term trend is undetermined. As I mentioned, though, it is improving, and this is in part to the efforts for streamside rearing. And there are 6 facilities for streamside rearing in the Lake Michigan Basin. 2 of these, the Manistee River, which is operated by Little River Band of Ottawa Indians, and the Kalamazoo River Streamside Rearing Facility, which is operated by Gun Lake Tribe. These populations of sturgeon have a streamside rearing facility that is helping with supplementation of that extant population. The other 4 Lake Michigan rearing facilities on the Milwaukee River, the Kewaunee River, the Cedar River, and the Whitefish River are helping with reintroduction of extirpated populations. The Milwaukee River facility has been in operation for about 15 years, and they are starting to see returns of some of their adult fish coming back to the river, though reproduction has not been noted yet. And I did want to give a quick shout out to the many partners that are assisting with the streamside rearing efforts or with the education and outreach associated with the streamside rearing efforts throughout the basin. So this graph is indicating some of the efforts that we've seen through streamside rearing. So across the bottom x-axis is when rearing began in 2005 through 2019. On the y-axis, we have the number of juvenile lake sturgeon that were stocked, fingerling lake sturgeon that are stocked each year for each of the facilities in the Lake Michigan and one, the Ontonagon River in the Lake Superior Basin. So the target stocking number is between 1,000 and 1,500 fingerling fish each year. And it took about 5 years of the beginning of those operations to fully reach those annual targets for stocking. But over the past 15 years, the total number of fingerling lake sturgeon stocked into Lake Michigan has been over 45,000 fish. And so these efforts have contributed significantly to restoration of the lake sturgeon population. And while we consider their status to be poor as of right now, we have a lot of optimism for these restoration and augmentation efforts for helping rebuild those populations and help with that increasing trend in the lake sturgeon population. So what are some of the research needs? And I go back to this initial map that I showed of those 41 historic lake sturgeon populations. And as I had mentioned before, 9 of these populations are unknown. We don't know the status. We haven't detected much recruitment. And so one of our research needs would be to develop a little bit more time and effort for understanding these unknown populations. What is the current status? How many fish are in these systems? Could reproduction and recruitment be occurring through habitat restoration efforts, or what might be the limiting factor? For some of these, we know it could be barriers to accessing their habitat, but for instance, the Boardman River, which is indicated by the number 10 in Grand Traverse Bay area, has undergone significant restoration efforts and the removal of 4 dams in the past few years. And so with that being an unknown population, but a historic consideration of a lake sturgeon stock, assessing what could be the future of the Boardman River for lake sturgeon. Another research need would be in some of the rivers that we have the occasional observations of sturgeon going into them. And this includes the Sheboygan, the Paramarquette, the White River, the Millicoquin, and the Boardman. So every so often we get anecdotal observations either by fishermen or by partners who are doing fishery surveys for other target species, and a sturgeon observed or captured. And so with these occasional observations, trying to determine, is this an indicator that sturgeon could be returning and that efforts with restoration or supplementation could rebuild a historic stock? Or understanding, is this just the watering nature of sturgeon into some of these streams? So digging a little bit more into research to understand what these occasional observations of sturgeon in historic tributaries could mean, and if there's the potential for restoration. And then there are several populations that are extirpated throughout the basin. And with these extirpated populations, undergoing research to understand what is the current habitat status throughout those tributaries and systems. Could it potentially host lake sturgeon, or is there restoration efforts that could be taken to help either rebuild or reconnect habitat? So what is the restoration potential in those extirpated streams? And I've called out just a few: the East and West Twin Rivers, the Manitowoc River, the Sturgeon, the Sheboygan, and the Root River, as these systems that were extirpated that have the potential through some research to understand what could be the future of these systems in contributing to the lake sturgeon population in Lake Michigan. So the take-home message for this is that the lake sturgeon population in Lake Michigan continues to sustain themselves, but it's at a small fraction of that historical abundance. So the status itself is poor, but we're seeing that it's trending towards increasing numbers. And while at least 8 of the extant populations appear to be self-sustaining, only 3 of those, Lake Winnebago, the Menominee River, and the Peshtigo River, have populations that are currently abundant enough that we can consider them to be healthy and secure. The improving 10-year trend assessment is based on what we've seen through the increased abundance and recruitment of sturgeon in some of these populations, stocking and streamside rearing efforts, and improved river connectivity and fish passage, especially the efforts at the sturgeon fish lift on the Menominee River. The extant populations continue to need our support in both monitoring and protection. But there are several extirpated and unknown populations that research needs exist for us to understand a little bit further of what is the potential for both those systems and those stocks to be able to contribute to the overall status of lake sturgeon in Lake Michigan into the future. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you have.